We're in the midst of a huge transformation where peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I am the Senior Partnerships Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I am very excited to welcome our next guest onto the interview series, Paul Whitney. He is the Chief Human Resources Officer at Sysdig. Paul, thank you so much for being here. If you want to share a little bit about yourself for our listeners, including your pronouns, and when you were younger, do you remember how exactly you answered the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Yeah, hi, Christina. It's good to be here. Thanks for the invitation. Yes, Paul Whitney, he, him, and Chief Human Resources Officer at Sysdig. You can probably already tell I'm not a native to the US. I grew up in the UK. I've been in the US, though, for 17 years now. And throughout my entire career, actually, I've always worked in tech companies. So the US was like the spiritual home for me of tech. And so I always wanted to get here. Once I'd started on my career path, that is, the question of what do you want to be when you grow up, my mother reminds me that when I was like 5 or 6 years old, I apparently wanted to be a garbage man. I don't know why, but that was my dream job back then. And when I finally got a little older, it was when I first got interested in music. All my heroes and heroines were musicians. So I guess I thought I might try to be a musician, but as you can see by being in HR at Sysdig, that didn't quite go according to plan. But anyway, I'm happy it didn't, because I'm not sure I'd have enjoyed that lifestyle as much as I've enjoyed the one that I actually lived.
Well, I am glad to hear that you are enjoying your lifestyle as an HR leader, not tapping into those musical abilities, but really making an impact on folks' lives. Would love to talk about Sysdig and kind of what you see around the employer brand of the organization to start out. One study showed that just 31% of employees say their company offers really something unique, and only 23% of human resources leaders expect most employees to stay with the firm after the pandemic ends, whenever that may be. What is unique about Sysdig?
Probably the same answer that a lot of companies would give. It's more in the experience of it than the definition of it. It's, the culture is the unique differentiator. I had the pleasure of working with the CEO of Sysdig at a former company, and I knew when he called me and said, "Hey, would you be interested in joining Sysdig?" It took a nanosecond to say yes, because he makes the life of anyone in human resources worth living, because he cares about the culture, he cares about the people. And that translates into all kinds of behaviors and experiences that we share. The level of transparency and trust in the organization. You can ask anyone in Sysdig and you'll get a similar kind of answer, I would guess. So we're super proud of the kind of company that we're building. The mission that we're on is part of that. You have to be challenged by doing something difficult. And we're trying to really establish ourselves in what is still a very emerging market, which is cloud security. But we're doing it in a way that we also can be proud of, building a culture that people will look back on and say, you know what, that was the best experience of my working career. And that's really the mission that I set for the HR team, is to establish that. When everybody leaves Sysdig, we want them all to look back and say, that was the best experience of my career. And everything that we do is therefore filtered through that sort of mission statement.
I love that. I think it's important to ask the question of how do you make this the best experience for folks at Sysdig, and make sure that alumni of the organization, anyone who really interacts with the company, feels that way as well and feels that permeating. I want to dig a little bit deeper into the company culture. I know you and I have talked about this as well, and we see a lot of organizations really adopting a more flexible work schedule too. We were just talking about the wellness day that is coming up as well. The adoption of radical flexibility also, data shows, raises the number of employees defined as quote unquote high performing by as much as 40%. What role does that radical flexibility play in Sysdig's company culture?
Well, I think it's flexibility means choice, right? It's knowing that you can make a choice, feeling empowered to make that choice. And so whether you're a manager or whether you're an individual contributor, the expectation needs to be fairly clearly understood and aligned across the organization. So what is possible? I mean, you can't have limitless choice. That, hey, I can go and work in Tahiti if my job is a sales rep in Germany. That's not a choice that's reasonable. So the way we think about flexibility is providing maximum choice possible, consistent with business practicality, frankly. And so the way that we look at that is providing clear guidelines to managers. Clarity is a really important part of how you build connectedness across an organization today. And our belief system, our thesis is connectedness is what drives engagement. And there are multiple threads to what drives connectedness, but clarity is one of them. So what can I do? What is not okay? Making sure that you communicate that on a regular basis, but ultimately maximum freedom of choice consistent with business practicality. And I suppose that's how I would summarize it.
Yeah, building that connectedness is really important, and understanding how you can set people up for success when you have that choice as well. I think that, you can say that you really value radical flexibility, you value folks really providing their feedback, but if that is not aligned with action, or it's not aligned with how people work in reality, there could be a disconnect there as well. In terms of your role as a leader and as CHRO, how do you model those healthy work boundaries? So for example, if somebody actually does not have the bandwidth to do something, and really empowering them to say, actually, no, I don't right now, and really effectively communicating that. How do you think about that in your day-to-day?
Yeah, it goes back to the foundations of our culture, right? Because if somebody doesn't feel safe in being able to make those kind of statements, they're not going to make them. And whether that translates into quiet quitting or some other form of withdrawal, it's essentially you're silencing that voice. If you silence that voice, you're going to have trouble. So for us, it's all about building an environment of trust where everybody's voice can be heard and can be responded to. And then I'll go back to Suresh and say, well, he models this because every question that comes up at all hands is remarked on, responded to. We know some questions are maybe a little more cynically motivated than others, but it's okay. It's just part of what you have to deal with when you promote transparency and trust. And that is really the essence of the culture that we're trying to build. So people feel that their voice can be heard and can be responded to, and that whatever their point of view, it isn't something that we will say, your view doesn't count. Right? And so my personal ethos is everybody matters or nobody matters. And so no matter what the person's issue is, you have to recognize that you may think in the scheme of things, it's not a particularly big issue, but for them it is. So paying due attention and being in an environment where dialogue exists, and that dialogue is rooted in trust and transparency. So that's really, I think, how we try to think about it here.
Yeah, that perspective is really important, putting yourself in the other person's shoes, really building those high trust environments. It's everybody's responsibility. I think, you might not be talking to Paul, the CHRO, every day, but you are talking to your manager on a pretty regular basis. And it might be the first person that you connect with in terms of a hiring manager for your role as well. And we know not everyone wants to be a people manager, and that is more than okay. For folks who are opting in, how do you set up those new managers for success to really build those relationships, build high trust with your team, and also set up those guidelines as well?
Yeah, I wish I could say we had it all figured out, but truth is we don't. We're a company of 750 people, and we have around 150 people in management positions of different types. Some of them are relatively new managers, some of them are more experienced, some are VPs, some are directors, some are frontline managers. So there's different constituencies that you have to think about and the different needs. There are some core principles though, and I think that that's where we start. And you mentioned empathy. That is a core principle for leadership. So we try to define what we believe are those core principles, and then we essentially curate content and programs to support manager enablement so that they can learn about those principles. And so these days, I think, plugging managers into a room for 2 days or 3 days and drilling them with content, and then they go back to the workplace and they forget almost immediately anything that they've been taught about leadership. It's probably not the best model anymore. And so we use a series of events underpinned with curated content to provide journeys for managers, and building trust is one of those journeys. So there'll be a series of elements that they can learn online through our management development platform. And then we support that with leaders teaching leaders seminars, brown bags, other events where managers can just get together and share experiences. It's a constant drumbeat of enablement. And the parallel that I talked to the exec team about when we launched into this was, hey, look, salespeople need to be trained on the product. They need to know the use cases. They need to know who the ideal customer profile is. We invest a lot in sales enablement. And right now we invest zero in manager enablement. And yet these are the pivotal force multipliers in building out your culture and driving productivity and doing all the things that you want leaders to do. So we need to invest in manager enablement. Big surprise, everybody says yes. And so we created the program to support that. And it really is, that's, I think, the center of it is, think about manager enablement as one of the critical things that you do to drive organizational culture and productivity.
I think that is a really good parallel, because you see a lot of companies really investing in the sales enablement for their product or service, which is so important. And it's also just as important to enable the sales folks and everybody at the organization through those managers too, and provide that same level of resourcing and support and information.
Absolutely.
I think that on the other side too, you can have folks who are really dedicated to being managers, ingesting all of that information, and especially new hires, you want to come in and make an impact, really soon, or really provide that information for like why someone was hired as well. And if you come in very strong on 24/7, it's very easy to burn out, which we have seen as well. That's job related, that's life related. Similarly to kind of the different opportunities that you have to be great managers, what tools do you provide those leaders to proactively prevent burnout on their team and really model that behavior?
Yeah, I think that's a super hard question to have one definitive answer to. It's like everybody's considering, I think, across the industry, how do you avoid burnout? Look, my personal thesis is it goes back to this ability to make choices. At the end of the day, the company can say whatever it wants, managers can say whatever they want. Individuals have to make their choice, and to be sure that their choice can be acceptable and understood. And so if I don't want to work after 5:30 in the evening or 5 o'clock in the evening, I should be able to say that. And as long as I'm doing my job, then what does it matter? And it's same with location. If I want to work in a remote location, if I can still do my job, what does it matter? So I think it's all about, again, it comes back to empowering individuals to make choices that work for them. We cannot possibly configure an environment that is attentive to every individual's own work-life situation. So individuals have to make the choices. Managers have to be enabled, and it is part of our program of commitment to managers, that how to make decisions, how to negotiate with employees to get to an agreement. It starts with that empathy of understanding where the employee comes from. But this is, let people make their choices, let managers interpret those choices and have the dialogue and get to a place of resolution. Tops down imposed rules like Apple, you must be in the office 3 days a week. It doesn't work for us. So we believe that those choices can be made at the team level. as long as both parties are reasonable in what they're setting out to do, then you're going to get an accommodation. And so that's our view. Very little is imposed tops down. It's more about letting people know that these things can be determined at the local team level.
Absolutely, that optionality. A lot of folks are talking about results-driven workplaces as well. If you're working efficiently and working smarter, not longer as well. And as long as you are getting your work done, really collaborating and giving people that autonomy, it's something that folks are looking for as well. We've talked about building trust, that psychological safety, how to enable managers. Once you have those foundations of key pieces of a workplace, you really have a situation where you have a lot of innovation, people can thrive and really contribute great ideas. And also these past few years, you know, if it's taught us anything, it's that business as usual is out the window. So you need to be creative. How are you expressing creativity at Sysdig, if you could provide an example or two?
Well, I guess our belief system, rightly or wrongly, is the best forms of creativity usually emerge in teams rather than individuals sitting alone in a dark room pondering on life. So we try to encourage. I mentioned very little is imposed or mandated top down. What we do say is we have a principle of collaboration as being the essence of creativity. So we encourage office attendance for the purposes of collaboration, and we don't mandate, but we're providing guidance to managers to say the expectation is, you know, at least one day a week you should feel comfortable gathering your team for the purposes of collaboration, and that's a guideline that all managers understand, all employees understand. If you want to opt out of that for whatever reason, then you still can. You still have that flexibility. But we're trying to encourage more people to want to come to the workplace. And I think most people eventually get sick of Zoom and they actually do want to meet people in real life. And so we're not finding huge resistance to this, by the way. So but it's all about, hey, you know, on those days we'll provide lunch. We'll set up the offices. We're changing the facilities structures so that they're built more around collaborative spaces and they are about individual desks. We're, again, empowering managers to have a budget so that they can take their teams out for dinners or lunches once a month, and you know, giving the guidance to managers that these are all possible things that they can do. So it's in a myriad of different elements. The essence, again, is drive collaboration, encourage that to the greatest extent possible. And, you know, it's still accepting that there's flexibility of choice, but out of that is really where creativity emerges. And we, you know, good example, we just had our exec offsite, and we have the exec offsite is 2 days, once a quarter. And we invite other folks from around the company to come, depending upon the topic. And there were some other senior engineers and marketing people there. New product ideas just emerged in the conversation. It was like watching the birth of something. You know, it was pretty incredible. That would not have happened likely if we were all in Zoom. We were all in a room in Half Moon Bay in California and gazing at the ocean, which was fantastic. But this collaboration was real, and you could feel the energy, and people were feeding off each other's energy to deliver these, you know, amazing insights. So that's, I think, is where it matters, is being able to get back to that mode of collaborating in real life, in person.
Yeah, and how are you kind of reworking or redesigning the office to really fit that collaboration? Nobody likes being told what to do without the why as well. So what is the motivation for coming in behind the office too? And really, again, setting people up for success too, and really not taking a one size fits all approach to everybody enjoys working from home, everybody enjoys going into the office 5 days a week as well, and finding that middle ground too. Another piece of company culture, this dynamic thing, is ensuring folks feel like they belong no matter what department, what manager level, or what day it is for them, whether it's day 90, day 260 for them at the company. What would you say are the key pillars of Sysdig's diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy today?
Oh, it's truly emerging. So when I first joined just over a year ago, there was some conversation about it, but really not much was happening. And it's not untypical, frankly, of startups that, hey, we're hiring and we're building product and we're trying to figure out how to sell it. And, you know, the cultural imperatives, because I believe it's an imperative of diversity, equity, inclusion, don't get as much space on the agenda as they should. And then, so I joined the company, and of course it's something that I feel very passionate about. And we can all find hundreds of surveys that are clear about the advantages of committing to such a culture. So I really started on a journey just over a year ago. First of all, just look, talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, when you have a very non-diverse, non-inclusive workforce, mostly white males, it has some limited value. So let's start by influencing the hiring process. And so we did that a year ago, and we did meaningfully change at least the gender mix. And we then engaged with an external consulting company to do an audit of what are our practices and where do we have the greatest opportunities for improvement. We then formed a DEI council, and I'm so thrilled with the level of passion that council brings to the conversation. And we're just about to launch our first diversity, equity, and inclusion survey using Culture Amp. So these are all things that are coming together, and there'll be strands of activity that come out of this, like training on unconscious bias for managers and even for interviewers. And so there'll be things like that will happen. But we now have, I think, a fairly solid program of things that we're doing to change the outcome. My belief is this is never, setting targets is useful. I don't like to set them in terms of, hey, you know, we should do this by the end of this year. I prefer to say our long-term goal is X, and now let me show you the progress towards this over time, because I believe it's actually a battle that never ends. And so the targets are useful just to set direction, but they should be longer term. The program of things we've got going, I think, is going to meaningfully change the culture around DEI. And it is something, unless you are intentional about it and commit resources to it, whether they are financial or people, then you'll get what you get. You know, intentionality is the crux of building a DEI program, and never give up, right? Just keep going, because it's, like I said, it's just a battle that never ends.
Yep, it's a continuous journey. It's never too early, never too late to start. And the intentionality is so critical. You could have the best intentions, but if you don't invest time, money, and resources into inclusive hiring and developing out programs in a sustainable way, it's not going to happen, even with the best intention too. So appreciate you laying out some of the frameworks and groundwork for that too. Something else that we discussed as well was the receive reward curve framework. Can you tell me a little bit about that and what the goal is?
There are 1,000 things that you could do in DEI. It is really important that you focus in on a limited number and really push hard at those. So that's why we're engaging with the external consultant to help us define what those priorities are. And the council will determine that focus, and they will drive. But you don't try to do too much, right? Just pick a few and drive forward. Meaningful, but drive forward. So anyway, on that, and the curve I think we were chatting about before was the sort of perceived reward versus the stress or perceived effort that goes in. And I think that, again, it's a personal thesis, but I believe that every individual has, they're driven by some level of stress. Stress is therefore not necessarily a bad thing. It might be a personal motivator to you. It's not a bad thing so long as your perceived level of reward exceeds your perceived level of stress. If the opposite is true, then it is a bad thing. So building the culture that says, how do people perceive the reward to be always higher than the level of stress, it is in terms of how you give feedback. It is in terms of compensation. It is in terms of career growth. There's so many levers that you can pull when it comes to driving that perceived reward. It's also important that people understand their position in the company, how what they're doing contributes to the greater good of the organization or the longer term mission of the organization. So communications is again a constant drumbeat to reinforce that. But we're ultimately, I think, just trying to go back to where I started. It's build that culture where everybody looks back and says, this was the best working experience of my career. And so we're always designing every process with that in mind, whether it's the recruiting process, the onboarding process, the compensation process, the performance management process, whatever it is, we design it with that in mind, which means think about the individual employee. A performance management process that gives managers an easy way to bucket people into, are they doing great, doing good, whatever? Okay, but what about the individual employee? How do they experience that? Does it have meaning for them? Do they fear it? Is it designed to give them something important and meaningful, or is it designed to frighten them? So all the time we're thinking about making sure everything we do has that end game in mind of best experience.
I think that's a good North Star to have too, as you're developing out programs, processes, and it's a question that really anyone can ask themselves because everybody has a responsibility to create the place that folks feel like they can do their best work. Paul, out of the many things that we discussed, is there anything that I did not ask you or anything you would like to underscore for our audience?
No, I think appreciate the questions. Thank you very much. Enjoyed the conversation. I think it's, again, when I talk to fellow HR people, it's always for me that question of, you've got to be able to answer, why do you exist? Why does the company give you money? And if you can do that, I think it will inform everything you do as a function and will be a clear link to the value add you bring to the organization. So that's my thought.
Thank you, Paul, for being on Reimagining Company Culture this afternoon.
Thank you very much. Enjoyed it.
Of course, and as a reminder for folks who are listening at AllVoices, we really believe in employees and employers being seen, heard, and understood, and know it's a requirement for the business to really succeed overall. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.